Hey, Expat Dad here. Today we're going to talk about the most powerful people on the planet, the American voter. Yes, the American voter is the most powerful person on the planet. And let me explain, let me make my case, and I'm curious about your thoughts. Please put them below. So, the American voters make decisions in the ballot box that not only affect the United States, the most powerful and most economically dominant country in the world, but it also affects the fate of other countries and the people of other countries. So let me just give you some examples. I'm going to start by giving you some examples of what I mean. Then I'm going to give you evidence as to how other countries are reacting to that, and why the American voters are a group of people you want to watch moving forward, and what that would even look like moving forward, and how that's affected us. So let's get started. So here's an example, right? World War I. The United States did not join anybody during World War I because the American voters did not want the United States to join, despite the presidents, speaking about World War II in particular, but presidents, even if they wanted to join, they could not. Their hands were tied because the American voters did not want to join. Particularly the German American voters, they wanted the United States to remain neutral in this conflict. And just imagine if had the United States joined the war, whether on the Triple Entente side or the Triple Alliance side, if they fought for the Germans or not for the Germans, they fought with the Germans as opposed to against them, those world could have been completely different, right? I mean, imagine if the Germans had secured a flank west of the UK from the most powerful, it wasn't the most powerful, but it was the most productive country in the world, right? It would have changed history. So that was one example. Something closer to today is Bill Clinton, right? Herbert Walker Bush, I think his numbers look good for a second term, but what happened was that Bill Clinton came in and wanted the United States to focus on domestic issues, right? It's the economy, stupid. And that resonated more with the American voters at the time, despite some could argue that it's quite the opposite today. I think if the American voters could vote, would they vote for the New World Order that Herbert Walker Bush wanted? So something to think about. And Bill Clinton won, and that is what has led the United States more and more focused on national interests first, and which has brought Trump, which we'll talk about as well. So another example of what is happening today is the Russia-Ukraine war. Arguably, a reason why we have this Russia-Ukraine war is because of NATO's expansion into the East, and we need to look at that. Did it make sense for the United States to go into Eastern Europe and say, all right, we're going to protect you and you and you and you? Of course not. What value did it have for the United States to say, I'm not going to say Finland, but, some of the other Eastern European countries and say, look, we're going to defend you if Russia attacks you. What do Americans get from that? What does America get from that? Well, a major reason as to why that happened was because Bill Clinton wanted the Eastern European American vote. He wanted those voters, and he figured that if he did something like allow NATO to expand eastward, he would get their votes. And that was a major reason as to why NATO did what it did. I mean, just think about how that's affected the world today, right? So how are countries reacting to that? Well, they're trying to influence Americans. We can look at how much foreign countries are spending to get the American public's attention. $530 million per year is what I'm seeing. And a lot of that money goes to say, there's lobbying, but there's also newspaper articles. China, for example, in the New York Times, I think it's the New York Times or in the Financial Times, creates its own column. They just buy a whole section, with good news about China to influence Americans. And speaking of China, the United States has one of the biggest ad markets in the world, 490 billion, I believe, a year. And countries like China, Japan, Germany, they are investing heavily into the advertising, and it accounts for roughly 40% of the global advertising. So countries are working hard to influence the American voter. Heck, even Canada. What was that advertising with Ronald Reagan during the World Series? right? What was that all about if that was not for Canada to influence the American public sentiment towards getting Trump to stop using tariffs? Because Canada understands, and a lot of countries understand that the power that American voters have. Another example is the Vietnam War. The leader, Ho Chi Minh, I believe his name was, the leader of northern Vietnam knew he couldn't beat America toe to toe. And so his strategy was to make the war look in a way to influence the American voters, to get the American voters to want out of this war. And it worked. So the American voters hold a lot of power. And this is, again, just to wake you up to that, or to just share this thought with you on that. Now the question next is, well, it's not really the American voters, it's the corporations who can get the dumb Americans, as we are referred to by foreigners, dumb Americans, to do what the corporations want. And that is not true. If you look at Trump, his victory is, in fact, the quintessential example as to why corporations cannot get American voters to do what they want. If you look at 2024, the amount of money that Harris was able to raise, 700 million, if not more, plus, versus Trump's 45 million. And you look at how, in 2016, the Democratic Party that had the majority of the funding from corporations, they were so comfortable to call the American vote. They even try to use psychological tactics from calling anyone who talked about Trump racists, bigots, deplorables, right? All these psychological tactics, right, to making people voting for justice, for equality, for all this stuff, people who voted for Harris. They tried all this stuff, and still the American voters chose Trump in 2024. Now, he won the popular vote, not by much, but he won it. He did win it, and he won the delegates by a landslide, which shows that the American voters cannot be so easily controlled, and that they do think for themselves, and that they are a power to be reckoned with and understood and worked with. And that's what's happening today. And so what does that leave us today? Well, let's look at some things that are happening today. For example, illegal aliens, this whole not immigration, because it's not immigration. And look, my mother was an immigrant to the United States. My wife was an immigrant to the United States. They both naturalized. They both accepted American culture, and they both allowed themselves to become part of the American culture. So these people coming in are not immigrants. They're illegals. Now, the thing is that with these illegals coming into these states with no power, with nothing, well, the Democratic Party's strategy was to give these illegals voting power, right? The Democratic Party knew that if they could control these voters, that they would have a lot more power in the elections and in how things went around the world. Imagine that. Imagine you're a party, because that's been a big thing for politicians, right? They want to be able to control the American voters, right? Psychology was used in the early 20th century, right? Propaganda. Remember, Hitler there was a big thing with Hitler's Nazi party. Propaganda was a big tool used. And so if a party, the Democratic Party, can say, hey, look, we can have direct control over these voters, plus control all the propaganda, the mainstream propaganda lines, we can control the American voters, and that is world power. So that's one way that the power that the American voters have. And I think the American voters recognize that on both sides of the aisle, because they see the danger of giving that power to people who haven't really, in my opinion, earned it. Now, you can argue that people, they pay taxes. Well, I'll tell you what, if you go live in another country, which I've done, I've lived in many foreign countries, hence expat dad. If you're paying taxes in those countries, you still don't get to vote. And in fact, in a lot of those countries, if you want to vote, you're going to renounce your citizenship. You're going to swear an oath. If it's a monarchy, you're going to kiss the ring. Like in Spain, you're going to swear allegiance to the King of Spain, for example, and then you get the citizenship, and then you can vote on things. So we have to understand that The baseline for being able to vote in a country is not just paying taxes somewhere or starting families illegally. It is you come to the country, you follow the, you follow. Anyway, I don't want to get into the politics of this, but you get my point. A major and I argue that's a big danger as well. With let's say you have illegals who came in and they said they started families. Well, guess how they're going to vote? Do you think they're going to vote to to put stronger borders, right? And look at the legal immigrants. They're voting against the illegals, and why? Because they don't want that to share that power with people in whom, in their opinion, will probably vote against their own opinions, and who, in their eyes, haven't really earned it. Anyway, I didn't want to get all political with that, but I wanted to explain a little bit about the power of the American voter, and I am curious to see what's going to happen as we move forward, because the United States has been having this nationalist sentiment. The American voters are becoming more and more nationalist. And this has happened in the past, believe it or not. If we look at a lot of the territorial expansion that occurred in the 19th century, a major reason was because of the nationalist sentiment. That's how we ended up in the Spanish-American War. That's how we ended up in the Mexican-American War. And I think that's how come we ended up in the War of 1812. I'll have to look at that one again. But this is where we're going. So keep an eye on the American sentiment, because the American sentiment, the American public opinion is going to determine the world as we move forward. That's all for now. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Look forward to hearing from you. That's all. Bye-bye.